All right, welcome to the U.S. Open. The draw's out. I'm Stephen Boughton, and I'm here to break it down for you. We've got routes to the final. We've got the potential quarterfinal matchups. We've got big first-round matchups. It's all going down. So we're going to get into it as Djokovic goes for his 25th major to defend his U.S. Open title. Carlos Alcaraz is going to have something to say about that. Jannik Sinner, can he shake off all the drama from this last week and have a good tournament? Or can Alexander Zverev come and play upset? We'll see. We're going to break it down. This is the slice presented by Betway. Thanks for being here. Now let's get into it. All right, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, and thanks for subscribing if you have not yet, because that helps us, and we're almost at 20,000. And once we get over 20,000, everyone gets a prize. Just kidding, but thank you guys for your support. And what a week, the US Open week, the final major of the year. There's always so much energy going into this event. And I'm up here in Canada in the Slice headquarters studios, and I've got a great view of everything, I feel like. The draw's out. It's very interesting. So we're going to break that down. Let's take a quick look at the betting odds presented by Betway, because this is a very interesting race for the top three guys. I think it's pretty obvious that there's the top three guys. The betting odds show that. They got Carlos Alcaraz at plus 140 to win as the betting outright favorite. They've got Betway has Novak Djokovic as the second place at plus 200, and Jannik Sinner just behind him at plus 275. So, and then next is Alexander Zverev at plus 900. They got Daniil Medvedev at plus 1200. So, shout out to Betway for supporting the slice, and always bet responsibly if you're going to do that. The draw is very interesting for a number of reasons. So first things I always like to do is to break down what do the potential quarterfinal matchups look like. And so we're obviously going through the men's right now, and we will get to the women's. So stay tuned for that. But Sinner, the potential quarterfinals are this. It would be Sinner, Medvedev, Alcaraz, Hurkacz, Ruud, Zverev, Rublev, Djokovic. So I think the big news of the draw is that Sinner, Alcaraz, and Medvedev are on the top half, while Djokovic is on the bottom half. It's a little different this second, I think, because Medvedev has not been playing well on the hard court swing. But in general, he lost early in Cincinnati and Montreal. But in general, and at the majors, the top four players in the world on the men's side are quite obviously Djokovic, Sinner, Alcaraz, and Medvedev, no matter which way you chop it. And that's pretty clear. Three of them are on the same side of the draw for the second major in a row. So I think that's significant. The odds of that are just not high. And this is actually a crazy stat. For Alcaraz and Medvedev, they seem to find themselves on the same half of the draw. In fact, they've found themselves on the same half of the draw in 5 of the last 6 majors, going back to 2023 Wimbledon. The only one they weren't on the same half was Roland Garros this year, and Daniil Medvedev is not exactly a threat at Roland Garros. To be fair, no disrespect, Daniil. I don't think you'd disagree. So very interesting. I think Djokovic has got to love his draw. If you're a Djokovic fan, you've got to be very happy that he has, again, just like last year, found himself on the opposite side of the draw as his 3 biggest threats in a major in a 5-set format on hard court. That would be Alcaraz, Sinner, and Medvedev. So you could say Djokovic has gotten the easiest draw out of the 3 of them. I don't know why people think that's like me. Sometimes people will be like, you're like saying Djokovic has got an easy draw. No, if you're a Djokovic fan, that's a good thing. And if you're a Djokovic, that's also a good thing. It doesn't always mean he's going to win the tournament. He had that at Wimbledon this year as well. Alcaraz beat him. But in general, in majors, I think if you take too much damage before the late rounds, playing tougher opponents, it's not good for you. Your time on court matters, and we will be tracking it as we go through the tournament, the time on court from the top contenders. So we're going to look at the routes to the final for the top 3, and I'll tell you why Djokovic is the easiest and where Alcaraz and Sinner goes, and then we'll get into the specific draws of the big 4 or the top 4 players. How does that sound? Okay, let's look at Djokovic's. So Novak Djokovic rode to the final. First round qualifier, could be Canadian Gabriel Diallo, friend of the show, who qualified. Then he plays Struff, who that's a pretty tough second round because Struff can play huge, obviously. But to be fair, and like I said on Twitter, big hitters have never really bothered Djokovic on the hard court. His returning is just too good. He makes the big serve almost work against you. So I don't see Struff being an issue, especially for a very well-rested Novak Djokovic. Then we get into an interesting one. Alexei Popyrin, who obviously just won in Montreal, playing the best tennis of his life. He took a set off Djokovic in Australia. So could that be a big challenge for him, a serious challenge for him? We'll see. And then we got Ben Shelton, who, again, second year in a row playing at the U.S. Open. Will Djokovic hang up the phone again, or will Shelton get some revenge this year? I don't think much would change from last year, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's big players. Struff, Popper, and Shelton, obviously huge players. And then you got Rublev, if this goes to plan. Djokovic has kind of owned Rublev in the majors for sure. Everyone has in the quarterfinal rounds of the majors. No offense, Rublev. So that shouldn't be a huge issue for Djokovic. And then Zverev. I think Zverev's a tough matchup. Obviously, Zverev has beaten Djokovic in big matches before, but in general, and especially at the majors, Djokovic has owned Zverev. So that's a semifinal matchup that is the best possible one for Djokovic for sure. And then in the final, he would either play Alcaraz or Sinner or Medvedev. So yeah, that's the Djokovic route. I think it's definitely, it could be easier. I think his route at Wimbledon this year was easier. For sure, he played Koprova, then Fernley, then Popyrin. He actually Popyrin took a set off in there as well. So they played a lot. That's kind of crazy. They played a lot in 2023 or 2024 in the majors. But then he played de Minaur and then Musetti, and then and then was into the final against Alcaraz. So I think this U.S. Open draw is harder than Wimbledon for Djokovic. So he's going to have to be sharp. But he's super well rested after not playing since the Olympics. Maybe will that translate to rest? We don't know. He's going to have to shake it off pretty quick, depending on who he plays as a qualifier, and then right away into Struff, Popper, and Shelton. So we will see how that goes for him. Okay, now let's look at the number one player in the world, Jannik Sinner, who's obviously had so much stress in the last few weeks, and turns out the last few months with this positive test for Clostebol and the acquittal of any wrongdoing. But let's look at his route to the final, and then we will talk about his current state. So he gets Mackenzie McDonald in the first round, not a qualifier. He gets Alec Mickelson, who he just beat in Cincinnati en route to the title there in the second round. Then he gets Nicholas Jarry, who is a great player, big hitter, can do damage against anyone. I think he can kind of self-destruct sometimes, but if he's playing well and playing on, he can really hurt and be dangerous against anyone. Then he's got Tommy Paul, who's super dangerous in general. Obviously, such a good player, such a versatile player. Then he's got the craziest, quarterfinal, semifinal, final run, impossible right now. He could play Medvedev in the quarterfinals, who again is part of that top 4 best players in the world, especially on hard court. U.S. Open runner-up last year. Then he could play Alcaraz in the semifinals. Then he could play Djokovic in the final. So the routes to the final, people always talk about, if you get some outliers in the first few rounds, like for example, in Wimbledon, Sinner played Berrettini in the second round, and that was, factored into him having, I thought, the toughest draw at Wimbledon. But this, at the U.S. Open, I think the reason his route to the final probably is the toughest is because of those last 3 names. But you could also include the last 4: Paul, Medvedev, Alcaraz, Djokovic. That's enough to make anyone puke. It would make me puke, especially if Sinner is dealing with his hip potentially. Like I said, he's, on the podcast, he's been looking not healthy, and he's also been going through all the stress. So either he finds out, a way to rest up and has kept his body okay for this last week, which isn't really likely because you have to practice and you have to do things, or he's using all this stress and drama as a chip on his shoulder. He could have a good run, but he's up against it, I would say, with that route to the final, and that draw is a very tough one for Sinner. Alcaraz. road to the final, qualifier in the first round, and then BDV, Botic van de Zandschulp. And then it goes right into Jack Draper, round 3. Not easy. 25th seed. Will Jack be kind of cleared of all the drama that he faced in Cincinnati with that ending against Felix Auger-Aliassime? Will he have kind of snapped back in after playing a really loose match after that? Sebastian Cordes played great. He won Washington. He's been playing great on the hard courts. Hurkacz is a beast on the hard courts. Huge serve, can beat anyone. Then he could play Sinner, and then Djokovic. So that is not an easy route either for Alcaraz. But to be fair, all routes are tough. But it seems like Sinner and Alcaraz has been getting tougher routes than Djokovic in the last couple majors. And so if I had to rank these as far as toughness, I would say Sinner, number 1, the most tough. Alcaraz, number 2, medium tough, but still tougher than Djokovic, is number 3. And the main reason for this is, yes, I don't think Djokovic has a cakewalk draw. He's had them before. Everyone has, but he's had a few. But this is not a cakewalk draw, but it's easier than the other two guys because he doesn't have to play the other two guys until the final, or Medvedev, which is, again, Medvedev coming into this right now, his form is very sketchy, but over 5 sets with these balls on the hard court where he's won on the US Open, where he's won before and he was a runner-up last year. The fact that Djokovic has all 3 of those guys on the other side of the draw is very fortunate for him, giving him factually the easiest draw out of the top contenders. Is that fair? Is that fair? All right, it is. Let's get into it. So here is the Sinner quarter. As you can see, we've got Sinner on the top, and then we've got Daniil Medvedev on the bottom half or bottom part of that quarter. For seeded players inside of it, who do you got? You got Flavio Cobolli now has worked his way into being a seed at the US Open, been playing very well. Cobolli's in there. He's on the Medvedev, 16th, you would call it. Or eighth. I'm not good at math. Don't quote me. You got Stefanos Tsitsipas in there. You got Tommy Paul. You got Artur Fils. You've got Nicholas Jarry. You've got Felix Auger-Aliassime. That is pretty dense quarter. Is there any big first round matchups in there? I think Artur Fils versus Lerner Tien is a pretty crazy first round matchup. Wild card for Lerner Tien. I don't remember the exact number, but he's been on a crazy run of wins in this summer. So he's a very hot player right now, and that'll be interesting to see. Tsitsipas versus Kokkinakis. That's just an insanely brutal first-round match for Stefanos. He seems to always get really tough first-round matches at a lot of majors, including the U.S. Open. But, you can say that's his fault for having his ranking drop so far out of the top 10. Mensik, Jakub Mensik versus Felix Auger-Aliassime. That's a tough first round for Felix, our Canadian guy. That is very not easy. And I would say Tommy Paul versus Lorenzo Sonego is a pretty tough first round match as well for him. So yeah, that's a pretty dense top quarter, I'd say. To me, I don't know. It seems like the top of the half of all these draws, no matter who's there, women's side too, these top quarters seem to be very dense, at least in the last 2 majors. That's my recency bias. Okay, Alcaraz quarter, this quarter number 2. Alcaraz is there. Hurkacz is bookending it. Who do we got inside that is a seed? We've got Sebastian Korda at 16. We've got De Minaur at 10. We've got Khachanov at 23. Arnaldi at 30. We've got Draper at 25. And for unseeded players, we've got Dan Evans. We've got Denis Shapovalov. That's a crazy matchup. So Alcaraz will play a qualifier, and he could play Botic van de Zandschulp, but he could more likely probably, I would say, play Denis Shapovalov, who that would be just a crazy second-round matchup, Alcaraz versus Shapovalov. Obviously, you're going to lean Alcaraz, but Shapovalov is, he's had a ton going on, so maybe he uses some of that as a weight, as a chip on his shoulder to play some good tennis and really cause an issue for Alcaraz. Who knows? You got Tabilo in there. You got David Goffin. But in general, I'm looking through this quarter, to be fair, and I don't see too much in it that that makes you want to feel sick. If you're Alcaraz, I think the players he can play, Shapovalov second round, Draper third round, outside of the big guns, it's the big guns are very scary in this quarter, but everyone else, it's not too many like dark horses that aren't seeded, in my opinion, other than Shapovalov, who Alcaraz could play next. So he could go. Alcaraz could go qualifier, Shapovalov, Draper, Korda, Hurkacz. Tough. Or De Minaur, who is back for the first time since Wimbledon, I believe. So that's like I said, tough quarter for Alcaraz. I think it goes first Sinner, second Alcaraz, and then we've got this Zverev quarter, who with Casper Ruud bookending it as the 8th seed. Zverev will play Rusev Wari in the first round, so that's a tough first round for Zverev, to be fair. Then he could play Walton or Mueller, and then he could play Cerundolo in the third round, or Mpeshi Berry-Card. Hello, biggest server in the game. Zverev could play Runa in the fourth round, so that's tough for him. But if you're Zverev, I still think you like this kind of quarter that you're in. Although Opelka is there and Musetti, but Musetti has not found his game on the hard courts like he did on the natural surfaces, that's for sure. But I think Runa is a fourth round, although Runa does play Nakashima in the first round, who has been a giant killer as of late. Yeah, Zverev, and then if he goes through Runa, he could play Ruud, who's been really off as well lately, or Fritz. So it's not an easy quarter. None of them are, obviously, but still probably the easiest of the three so far for Zverev. And then Djokovic quarter, we've got some really interesting names in this one. We've got Rublev, obviously bookending it, but Djokovic, we've already talked about his route. Who else is in there? You see, who do you see? You got Shelton, Dimitrov, Tiafoe, Popper, and as seeded players. You've got Baez, got Lehechka, but who did I see? Where did I see him? You've also got Dominic Thiem, who is unfortunately drawn against Ben Shelton. So Dominic Thiem wildcard will play Ben Shelton in the first round. So I guess that's not as easy as it could be for Shelton, but that's tough for Dominic Thiem, who gets the wild card because he's a former champion here. It's his last U.S. Open ever, unless there's a miraculous turnaround and he changes his mind. So that's a tough way for Thiem to start, but at least he'll hopefully get on a big court, and maybe the court, he's going to be playing an American, but maybe the crowd will get behind him, and maybe he'll cause an upset against big bad Ben Shelton. Who knows? Anyways, who else is in that this quarter that is surprising? You got Chris Eubanks in there. You got, like we talked about already, the seeded players. Outside of that, though, again, no, not as dense. So I think the bottom half in general is less dense than the top, and the Djokovic quarter, I would say, is the easiest out of the top three, but it might actually be more difficult than the Zverev one. But it's hard to say for sure. So, anyways, that's a look at the quarters that each player finds themselves in. It's an interesting draw. We're gonna have to see how this gets going. How will Sinner play? How will Djokovic play coming back from a break off after the Olympics? Those are the big questions for me. And we just can't wait to get into. I can't wait to get into it because Alcaraz also has struggled on the hard courts at the majors. Lost to the Australian Open to Zverev, lost to Medvedev last year at the U.S. Open, won the U.S. Open 2022. So where's he at? But in 2022, he didn't play Djokovic. He didn't play Medvedev. Sinner wasn't who he is now. So it's going to be interesting. Prediction, Alcaraz is the betting odds favorite. But part of me just thinks Novak Djokovic. How can you deny him? Is he really not going to hold any of the majors right now? If he loses, if he doesn't win the U.S. Open, he won't hold any of the majors. And that'll be the first time that's happened in a long time. So Djokovic is coming in the most rested, the most fresh. Yes, he's 37, 38 years old. I never remember which one. So, but again, I think with the way his draw is and the way his freshness and his body should be, I'm picking him as my favorite, my prediction to win the U.S. Open and get his 25th major. The 25th jacket that he's had in his bag for a few majors now, I'm predicting will be used. So that's my prediction. All right, let's look at the women's draw. We've got it here. There you go. Okay. Iga Swiatek at the top. Who's in her quarter? We've got Jessica Pegula. That's a tough one. I think they just played in Cincinnati. Let me just Let me just confirm that. They did not. Swiatek lost to Sabalenka, but Pegula has been playing very, very well. So that's not an easy round or potential quarterfinal matchup there for Swiatek. Second quarter is Rybakina at the 4 seed, has Paolini in her quarter. That's dense. 8 seed Barbora Krejcikova, Wimbledon champ, she is in the Coco Gauff third quarter as the 3rd seed. Coco Gauff, she's going to see if she can, defending U.S. Open champion, can she find what she hasn't found since then, essentially. And then Sabalenka on the bottom, my favorite, with Qinwen Zheng as the 7th seed in her quarter. So interesting quarters there. You got Gauff potentially to play Sabalenka in the semifinals. And then you got Paolini playing Canadian Bianca Andreescu in the first round. That is a brutal draw for Bianca Andreescu. Paolini has been one of the crazy stories on the WTA in 2024. So she's just going to have to work into that one and see what happens. Also tough draw for Paolini, if you're a Paolini fan, if you're Italian. So that's super interesting. And yeah, that's from a high level. This draw looks like, to me, the stories of the tournament on the WTA side are, can Swiatek convince people that she's still, outside of clay, is she still the dominant world number 1? We don't know. I don't think players are afraid of her outside of clay anymore. Like the top players are like, I can beat her. The serves that they have work against her. She can beat herself sometimes. We've seen that. And like she said, she's feeling tired. She's feeling exhausted from the schedule. So we'll see if that plays into her or plays into it. But yeah, stories to me, Sabalenka is the favorite to win. She's my prediction to win the U.S. Open based on what we saw in Cincinnati. But how is Coco Gauff going to deal with potentially Svitolina, potentially Emma Navarro, potentially Kostyuk, all in the first few rounds. And then Barbara Krejcikova, super steady. Can she make Coco beat herself? That's going to be interesting to watch. And how is that going to go down with her coach, Brad Gilbert? Interesting. Lots of storylines there. It's going to be big. That's a draw preview of the U.S. Open, men's and women's. Let me know your thoughts. Leave your thoughts down below. People are still freaking about the Jannik Sinner news. That's still obviously the biggest news in tennis right now. But these draws are big. And let me know if you think my analysis on the ease of the draw for Djokovic compared to Sinner and Alcaraz is accurate or not. Thanks for being here. Stay tuned to the Slice for our continued coverage daily once the tournament starts, presented by Betway. We'll be getting into it. We'll be keeping you updated because that's what we do. Thanks for being here. Thanks for subscribing. We will see you on the next episode of The Slice.